Button. All right. Hello, everybody who is here live, and then those of you who will be watching later for the recording. I know you are here to see Dr. P, and I'm excited to hear what she has to say about college essays. But I did just want to remind you, our last session for the Summer Opportunity Summit is tonight, 8 p.m. Eastern, and it will feature myself talking, of course, about scholarships and the opportunity that summer presents for students to earn scholarships. And that is for high school students of all ages. So even rising high school freshmen in the class of 2029, there are going to be scholarship opportunities for them this summer. So I hope to see you all there. With that, let me stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Dr. P.
Thank you, Dave. I'm so excited to be here. And as I do this, let me just give a plug for Dave because he and I gave a webinar together recently, and he just has such a wealth of information. It's really wonderful. So I'm sure that's going to be great. Okay, let me make this full screen now. And Dave, can you just let me know if you see it?
You're good to go.
Okay, great. So, hi, everybody. My name is Dr. P. Dominique Paterano. I'm the founder and president of Crimson Coaching. And this talk is called Summertime, and the writing is easy, thanks to Gershwin, an ode to Gershwin there. So I know that there's only a couple people right now in the live session, but please feel free to write where you're from or where your child's from and what grade they're in or you're in now in the chat. I won't be able to see the chat as we talk, but in the Q&A, I like to just kind of know where folks are from and what grade they're in so I can maybe tailor some remarks later to them.
And Dr. P, I'll just note that people who have questions can drop it in the Q&A. I'll kind of keep my eye on that. Somebody's saying they're from New York, New York. Daughter's in 11th grade. And I will hold questions until the end unless I see something that I feel like has to be answered right when you're speaking. So, all right.
Sure, absolutely. And hello, New Yorker. I'm a native New Yorker myself, but I'm a Florida transplant now. In fact, I founded Crimson Coaching in 2014 in New York City. So a lot of people ask me, why did you name your company after a color? And crimson is that deep red color in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And that's because crimson is the color of Harvard, and Harvard is where I did my undergraduate studies. And what I do is I coach students to achieve their highest potential through academic tutoring for subjects in school, through SAT, ACT, and other kind of standardized test prep, as well as college counseling and college essay coaching. And of course, the last little bit we're going to talk about today. Before I did that, I was a high school teacher for 10 years, where I really got to know sort of the teenage mind in the trenches, so to speak. And I taught at places like Horace Mann School in New York City, Scarsdale High School, a little bit to the north. And currently, I teach, I'm an adjunct professor. I teach part-time for State University of New York, Empire. I'm a historian. That's where the doctor and Dr. P comes from. And I teach American and global history. So the agenda is going to be, I'll be talking for about 20 to 30 minutes. And again, I'll be happy to take questions afterwards. You can put them in the chat if you're afraid that you'll forget, or we are such a small group, you can unmute yourself probably. And I just want to thank you for being here. Thank you who may be watching the recording later on, and to thank Dave, the scholarship coach, for inviting me. So the first question, we're going to kind of do the who, what, why, when, where, and how of some of college essays. And the why of why write them in the summer? Well, because most juniors don't look like this lady right about now, right? Junior year is super stressful, and you want to really give yourself a little time to decompress after AP exams, after potentially you take your SAT, ACT in May or June. in, so that you can really approach that college essay with a fresh brain and a fresh soul to start writing. I would also say, sometimes I get questions, can my ninth, 10th, or 11th, current 11th grader take or write their college essay now? There's nothing wrong with current juniors starting it now. For instance, if you think you're going to be away all summer, certainly you could start it now, but I really don't recommend any earlier, because, as I like to say often, there was a big difference in Dr. P between age 16 and age 17. Not so much between age 46 and 47. When you are a teenager, you grow a tremendous amount in the space of 1 year. And so you should be writing a very different essay as a junior than you would write as a sophomore or as a freshman. So let's just look at why we want to spend time on the college essay. And I think many parents and maybe even some educators don't appreciate how important college essays are to the overall application, according to NACAC, which is the National Association of College Admissions Counselors, in a recent survey of its members. So the first three things that are the most important are grades and the strength of the overall high school curriculum and the courses that your child chose to take. So I always say, even when I'm working on test prep with students throughout the school year, you should never do test prep at the expense of your coursework, right? Coursework should always be number one. But then check out 4, 5, and 6. Yes, the essay or writing sample itself is number 5, but guess where the college admissions counselors get to find out about numbers 4 and 6, the positive character attributes and the student's interest in attending. That is often, those two characteristics are often demonstrated through the student's writing sample. And so, after something that you often largely cannot control, which is how hard of a high school you went to, although you can control your grades, of course, the essay and what the essay can do for you comes in as next important. 7 and 8, again, recommendations, you really can't control that much. Extracurriculars, I think this would shock a lot of parents who are spending a lot of time and money on things like travel sports. While they're great character builders, and I absolutely recommend playing sports for an overall healthy lifestyle, they are way down there in the list, but surprisingly, not as low as your SAT and ACT scores. And look, full disclosure, I also prep SAT and ACT, right? So I'm not saying that students who want to get into that highest echelon of schools can just ignore test scores. They can't, right? All 11 of these things need to be strong if you're applying to the Ivies or a top 20 school. However, if you are applying to maybe a less competitive school, or if your family's budget can only account for or go towards college essay prep or test prep, I personally think that the essay is a lot more important, and therefore I would funnel my dollars and time there. So what kind of essays will students need to write? So let's see. When I say personal statement, I mean the main 650 word essay that is in response to one of 7 prompts on the Common App. And for those of you going through this process for the first time with your child, the Common App, it's the website is commonapp.org, is a portal to which schools may or may not belong, but many of them do, especially here on the East Coast, that agree to accept the same personal statement from your child. So they're not writing different essays for all the different schools that they're applying to, or at least not the big essay. They're writing that once. Okay, so that's the personal statement. But then, especially for more highly selective colleges, students will also be required to answer between, maybe 1 and 12 different supplemental essays per college, and they can range in length from 25 words to 600 words. And then finally, there are optional essays, and both colleges themselves and the Common App the Common App always has optional essays, but some colleges also offer various optional essays. Again, they can range in any length. Usually I've never seen them go higher than 650 words. And of course, as optional essays, they are not required, although I highly recommend writing them. And we'll talk about that a little later. Finally, I mentioned this just because the University of California system is so large, and many students outside of California also do apply to the UC system. The UC system is not on the Common App. They have their own portal. They give students 8 choices of personal interest questions, or PIQs. Students choose 4, and they are 350 words each. So let's look a little bit more granularly. So supplementals, of course, they could be anything the college wants to ask, but they generally form a couple broad types. And the first big one is the why us essay, right? The why do you want to go to University of Michigan or Lehigh University, whatever it is, right? And the biggest thing I always share with my students is you've got to do your research. Go on the website, find specific teacher, professor names, course names, and embed them into the essay. Once you have the general flow of that essay, of course, you could sort of recycle it for other schools' why us essays by just embedding different professor and different course names into that. Another very common, especially often among schools that make you choose your major or, select an intended major upon applying, is the why do you want to major in that subject essay? And I do recommend that students be as specific as possible. If there is anybody here who is not a rising senior or not going to be a rising senior this summer, I can share with you, I think it's really incumbent upon you to have some extracurriculars, especially if you're applying to a hot major like computer science, that you have some extracurriculars that speak to why you want to major in that. Because if you say, I want to major in computer science, but you've never done any extracurricular related to computer science, you will not be as attractive a candidate, of course, as someone else who has that in their background. And then following the Fair Students case in 2022, the Supreme Court case that struck down affirmative act or race in college admissions, many colleges tried to I don't want to say get around, but let's say they're not, because colleges are not allowed to receive demographic data from the Common App. And I will share with you, by the way, I was recently speaking to a classmate of mine from Harvard about her son's applications. And she was under the impression that because Common App asks for ethnicity, that the colleges receive it. But Common App asks for that information only for their own for their own statistical purposes. They are not allowed to forward on the racial and ethnic makeup of the candidate to the colleges. So what colleges have done is many of them have added a community question. Now, you don't have to write about race. You can write about a religious community, a community of knitters, maybe, that you belong to. You can think really broadly about the communities to which you belong. However, if your racial, ethnic, religious background is important to you, then you can write about that community as well. And again, these are all supplemental essays that generally can be recycled with a little retooling from school to school. Now, there are a couple of different types of optional essays. On the Common App, there's the COVID-19 essay. And I recommend, I mean, again, we're getting 5 years after COVID. I don't think that this generation was impacted as significantly as perhaps my students of 3 or 4 years ago. But, you know, for instance, I had a student who said she was being bullied at her high school, and she actually enjoyed staying home during COVID because she was able to get out of that situation. And she even used all of the online opportunities that popped up during that summer to tutor a Spanish-speaking immigrant from her town through their public library. And so that, you know, it doesn't always, your COVID essay doesn't always need to be a tale of woe. Of course, if something dramatic happened to you, you should absolutely write about it. But I do think that it may be worth rethinking, you know, if you're going to say COVID was really hard, I really had a hard time concentrating, and I didn't like being away from my friends. At this point, college admissions counselors have gotten, you know, tens of thousands of that type of essay. So you may want to flip it and think about if COVID did anything good for you, or of course, if it was really dramatically bad, you could write about that too. And then the Common App has a 650-word tell us anything you haven't been able to tell us elsewhere in the application. And I absolutely recommend taking that opportunity. You don't have to write the full 650 words, but if you cannot think of anything else, then answer a second prompt. You don't have to tell them you're answering a personal statement prompt, but basically structure your essay as if you're doing that. Every time that the colleges or Common App gives you the space to tell them something new about yourself, you should absolutely take it. So the biggest challenge, I think, when students work on their own is starting. You know, it's writer's block times 20, because this is writing about yourself. And throughout all of college, you've never been asked to write about yourself. So even if you can write an AP Lang essay or an APUSH essay like nobody's business, it's much harder to use your own life experiences as evidence than it is perhaps, you know, a document in a document-based essay. So I think that there are as many different processes as there are people who write. But I can tell you what my process of working with students is. And I will tell you, this is the same whether I'm working with students one-on-one or in workshops. And I will be giving, I'll mention that a little bit at the end. I will be giving 2 short boot camps this summer, one in June, one in August, and we'll be following the same kind of process. So the first step that we do is a brainstorm ideas. We really look at all of the different Common App prompts. And when I'm working one-on-one with students, I really will help them build an outline by questioning them about those experiences that they write about. They usually share their Google Doc with me, and by the end of the first session, they walk away with an outline that they can use at home to write. The next, in private sessions, say second to usually fifth session, we're working on the big structure of, making sure that each paragraph does its own job, that the story moves along from beginning, middle to end, without lingering too much on any one part. When I work with students in boot camps, what we do is for the second and third. The June one is 3 classes of 2 hours each. The August one is over a weekend, so it's 2 classes of 3 hours each. So each one has 6 hours. And what I do after the initial teaching portion of where we read essays, identify strengths, students brainstorm and outline, I then divide up the time and I meet with each student one-on-one for about 10 minutes and give them feedback on their draft. Of course, when I'm working one-on-one with a student, this process goes much longer. Of course, when we revise, I ask more questions and they get more homework. And often, depending on the student, some students need more scaffolding. And so I may actually include in the comments questions that they need to answer and where they need to answer them in the draft. Other students who are a little bit more mature and confident as writers, I can just do that verbally, and they're okay with taking notes on their own. So the last thing I would just counsel, if there are parents watching this, that it's great for you to give your input by about the third or fourth draft. I generally ask students not to show parents their draft in the first, second, or maybe the third, depending how sensitive they are. Because in those early drafts, our writing feels like we're pouring our heart out onto a page. And many parents have so much riding on their child's acceptance to college that some parents, in my 11 years of coaching students writing essays, some parents are not always the most supportive of these early efforts. And so a little later on, but before it's done, I say weigh in, right? And I would always say, try to practice what teachers do, which we call a criticism sandwich. So you say something nice, you put the critique in the middle, and then you end with something nice. That kind of makes the medicine go down a little easier. And then regarding teacher and counselor input, I would say, if your English teacher has a lot of experience in helping students write essays, then I think that's fine. But I have worked with students who have come to me in mid to late October wanting to apply early on November 1st, telling me that they worked with their English teacher for 6 weeks on a draft, and the draft was totally unusable, not just by my estimation, but by an interviewer for the college that they were hoping to apply to. This person had a family friend who was an interviewer for Brown. Not all teachers are suited to be college essay coaches. Again, an AP Lit essay is very different than a college application essay. So I would say choose that person carefully if you're not going to work with somebody who does this all the time. Guidance counselors, I think, might be a little bit more helpful, but oftentimes they just do not have the time to take a student from draft to draft to draft, right? Some of them have 500 students that they need to find colleges for and write letters for, and they're just not able to do that. So let's talk a little bit about timing and time management. Again, you don't have to do this in the order I prescribe, but this is just what I have found works for a lot of students. That you want to finish your Common App profile, like entering in your information, your parents' information, all that kind of boring form stuff by early July. I would finish your activities list by early August. And these are all things you'll find out that the Common App refreshes on or around August 1st, but fear not. The only things that get wiped away are college specific essays because they sometimes change from year to year. Okay. But your profile, the things linked up to your username will port over from year to year. Okay. I would try to have your main essay done by September 1st. And if you're still in the process of finalizing your college list, you definitely want to have that done by October 1st because supplementals required by individual colleges, well, you can't start them till you know where you're applying. In the fall and into the winter, that's when you will start writing your supplementals. You can also write your optional essays there. And of course, these assume, like many students apply early, not all, that you'll have at least one early action or early decision application. If you're doing that, many counselors want to go over your entire application by mid-October. And then you should absolutely continue writing supplementals for all of the other colleges on your list throughout November and December. Unfortunately, I have worked with students who come to me December 22nd. They never worked with me, before they submitted their early app, but they wound up getting either deferred or rejected from their EA or ED school. And then in the space of, 7 days, needed to write all of these other supplementals. Oh, and this one student also completely rewrote his personal statement because he figured if it didn't work for Georgetown, which rejected me, it may not work for anywhere else. So, really think wisely before stopping and kicking back your feet when you submit on November 1st. I like to tell students, don't even think about your November 1st app. Just keep going. And then, of course, you will submit your regular applications sometime around late December, early January. So, I would say there are very different models of college essay coaches. There are some who really are just editors. They never actually meet face to face with students. Instead, they just give feedback on Google Docs. I don't denigrate that. However, that is not my model. When I work privately as a coach, I work directly face to face with the student for 50 minutes. It may seem like, oh gosh, meeting you, 10 times for 50 minutes, that's a lot of time, but it actually saves the student a ton of time because you're not getting frustrated and spinning your wheels, writing draft after draft, wondering, is this right? Is this good? Is this what you want? And the anxiety level often ratchets way down, and no one can really write a stellar essay if they're anxious and nervous. So I think that, having somebody who's done this before is often really puts student and parents' minds at ease. The other thing is meeting with a coach once a week, just like any other coach you might have, right? Like some people maybe on Weight Watchers, right? They do, well, Weight Watchers, I think, is now out of business, but in the old days before Wegovy and Mounjaro, the Weight Watchers used to have a coaching model where you would meet with a coach once a week and talk about your struggles with dieting. Well, I mean, that can often motivate you to be more mindful, say, eating during the rest of the week. Same thing here. When you are accountable to another person, you often get done what you're supposed to get done. And I would say I do have a really good track record with students getting into where they want to go. It's not that all of my students go to Ivy League schools at all. Some of them don't even apply to any Ivy League schools. For me, my success is getting students into where they want to go, right? So this year I had several students get, into their first choice schools: NYU Steinhardt, Northeastern, Bucknell University. So really different schools. And if you'd like, you could check out my Google reviews. You could put in Crimson Coaching Google reviews, and you can at crimsoncoaching.com/test prep. I also have a button of where Crimson students attend college. And full disclosure, those are both my test prep students as well as my essay students. But many students start with test prep and then become an essay student the next year anyway. And I would say the biggest thing is this is an investment for the future. Many students report really being able to do this on their own when they apply for grad school. In fact, I recently worked with a student who I had prepped for SAT and helped her with her college essay before she went to University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she went in and had a fantastic time. And even though she felt like she needed help on the GRE test prep, she was okay with her writing her application essays on her own. And you know what? That meant that I did my job when she was in high school, and I was really proud of her. And she's a doctoral candidate now at Fordham in psychology. So let's just talk a little bit about what is coming up this summer, because after all, this summit is called Summer Opportunities for High School Students. So my college essay boot camps and private essay coaching. So the boot camps, the first boot camp is the 17th, 24th, and 1st of July from 6 to 8 p.m. The second one is just one weekend in late August. I know that, one time is not necessarily best for everybody, so I try to do them at very different times and in very different months. So hopefully, if you're interested in that, you might be able to attend. So this one comes with 3 hours of direct instruction from me, when we'll be talking mainly about the personal statement, but also a little bit about supplementals that I just mentioned, optionals, as well as the activities list and the best practices to write those, as well as one 10 to 15 minute private consultation. And you can go to my website, crimsoncoaching.com, upcoming dash classes dash workshops, and scroll to the big camo with a target that says College Essay Boot Camps and click on that if you want to learn more. And then if these times don't work, or you just don't like classes and you prefer one-on-one sessions, I start working with students as soon as summer starts generally. I do work in packages of 10, where basically it's sort of like buy 9 sessions, get the 10th free. Or if you don't think you'll need that many, a single 50-minute sessions. I would say though, I've never seen a student really get their personal statement and all their supplementals done in less than 10 sessions. They generally need that. And most students are finishing their personal statement and several supplementals with one package. Although I would say if you're applying to lots of different colleges, you may need 5 more. And if you're interested in that, just reach out to me directly at my email, which is info@crimsoncoaching.com. And so to learn more in general, if you think that you'd like to, do some private coaching, but would like to learn more, sign up for a free consultation with me at crimsoncoaching.com/contact. If you, feel like you'd just like to learn more about the college journey itself, or the journey to college itself, you can get my newsletter for free once a month by signing up at crimsoncoaching.com/newsletter. In addition, I have a YouTube which has probably about 3 or 4 dozen videos of varying lengths at youtube.com/Crimson Coaching. And this goes from everything from how to make the most of your college visits, which at least in New York, students are off from school this week. So if you're visiting colleges this week, you might want to tune into that one. And to, how to build a balanced college list and sort of everything in between. So I'll just leave this up on the screen for a little bit. Once again, that's my website, crimsoncoaching.com. My email is info@crimsoncoaching.com. And I would say email's easier way to reach me than phone, but that is a cell phone. So you could text me there if you're interested. And I will note, while maybe people are writing this down, the only person that your child will ever work with is me. I do hire outside tutors for things like AP Calculus, but for the college essay, I do all myself. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and maybe take some questions.
Yeah, so anybody attending that has a question, please drop it in the Q&A. You could put it in the chat. You can even ask to unmute and unhide yourself if you're that brave. While we're maybe waiting for a few questions, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you, Dr. P. This was fantastic. Lots of really great information. Love that sample timeline that you provided. I think that's really valuable. I also wanted to mention, I always have to, take a scholarship angle here. And, first thing that I said today was that there are scholarships open for students as young as freshmen in high school. Now, I'll actually say there are scholarships for grade school students, but we're not focused on that. But where I'm going with this is that you said how difficult it is for students to write an essay about themselves, that this is not something they're used to. Well, guess what? If you start your scholarship journey as a freshman, a sophomore, or a junior, you're going to write some essays about yourself. And I think it's going to be a big help when it comes time to start your Common App, your college admissions essays. So just a little bit of plug for scholarships at a high level there. All right, we do have a question here. Thank you for this. Very helpful. Dr. P, do you feel that in a 10-session package, the personal statement and maybe a few supplemental or optional essays can be completed during that time?
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it again and again with students who do the homework that I assign. So I will note in my entire career, there have only been 2 students who have been unable to do writing on their own. These were students who missed massive amount of school due to really serious health challenges that they had. And these students really required me to actually be live on, once pre-COVID, right next to them, and after COVID over Zoom. But most students who haven't thankfully gone through that are able to do the homework. But, some of them now and again will get forgetful or lazy or whatever. So I will say, yes, as long as they do the homework I'm assigning, they can get through the personal statement as well as a few supplementals.
Could you talk just a little bit about the why this college essay? And in particular, I'm wondering if a student says, I want to go to this college because the weather's nice or I like the campus.
Mm.
Is that what they're looking for?
Um, I don't think that that's bad to write as like reason number 5, perhaps,
Uh-huh.
but I don't think it should be at the top of your list. So when I teach students how to do this, I always say you have to go to the website and, it's a little formulaic, but
Mhm.
okay, you have to find one academic reason, one extracurricular reason, and one kind of overall sort of either campus culture or city. Like, for instance, a kid who wants to go to NYU might often say, because it's in New York City and I love being in a city, something like
Yeah.
that, right? Um, but even that should be sort of number 3. I think if you are not putting your academic reason front and center, I don't think that's a good strategy. And and depending on the school and what you're also right. See, this is where it gets you really want to think about your application as a whole. So if you wrote about sports or an extracurricular for your main one, your main essay, well, then I think you really want to go harder on the academics for the why this school, right?
Mhm.
But the reverse is true. So if you wrote, for example, a lot about your academic passions in your main essay, well, then keep the mention of academics to a minimum in your supplemental essay and talk more about your extracurriculars. It's all about sort of not repeating information you've given, and kind of having a well-balanced essay profile overall. But students, I would say, are sometimes, not all of them, but sometimes I think can be, you know uh, not as how shall I hate to use the word lazy, but they are not always as proactive in really scouring the website, and I will make them go back. You need to, if you want to major in biology, you must go to the biology department website. You must look at all of the biology courses that they offer. Find one that's interesting. Tell me why you find it interesting. If you want to do research with a certain professor, why? What was their book about, that they just wrote? You should get fairly granular in that. And I think sometimes students might think I'm going a little overboard, but when you see how competitive college admissions is these days, that kind of granularity is going to stand you out in among all of the really, I want to go to UF because the weather's really good in Gainesville. I mean, so yeah.
Yeah. Yep. Um, so I imagine that probably most of the audience are parents of juniors, rising seniors, but I do hope that some of the parents of younger students will watch this. And because of that, I want to ask about what I'll call curated experiences. And you touched on this a little bit. Some, the extracurriculars. Do you find that students who have not really curated some experiences, whether it's internships or jobs or clubs or whatever, do they have a harder time writing the personal statement?
I think they do, and I also think even more importantly, they have a harder time getting in.
Hmm.
So I can tell you about a Florida student that I worked with last fall. Lovely young man, so nice, and bright, and not a great writer, but not a bad writer
Hmm.
either. He wants to major in chemical engineering, but never had one single engineering extracurricular.
Hmm.
And did get rejected from not everywhere, of course. He did get in some schools, but he got rejected from the schools at the top of his list. Now, I will say, um, that's not always going to get you in.
Yeah.
So, for example, this Harvard classmate of mine, who again, her son did not work with me in any capacity, but he had a 1580 on his SAT.
Oh.
He went to one of the best high schools on Long Island. He was in the robotics club, had engineering experiences, and he got rejected or waitlisted from all the Reach schools, all of the Target schools, and only got into his what he thought of as safety schools.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so in that, look, I hate to play sort of Monday morning quarterback, but it could have been the quality of his essays because he was such a stellar applicant in every other way that I think at the level that he was aspiring to, MIT, those kinds of schools, even if you're a STEM kid, you're still going to need to write well
Hmm.
at MIT, right? Everything has to be good there. So,
Right.
I mean, I think he probably could have used some essay coaching in that. But I think that the extracurriculars do give you at least the fodder of what you're going to write about.
Yeah, yep. It's just think about it yourself. Like if you didn't do anything but your 9 to 5 job, and then somebody wants you to write about you, and it needs to be something that's engaging for the reader and something that's unique. Well, I mean, now you do have a pretty unique job, but you're not the only college admissions and essay counselor, and I'm not the only scholarship coach. So yeah, we might have something unique to say, but I mean, I think if people really wanted to know me, they'd want to find out that I'm into gardening and I have a food forest in my backyard, and I used to golf and now I don't golf at all. I don't know, just spitballing here. So it really is the outside the 9 to 5, which school is the 9 to 5 for the kid, that is really going to make them stand out.
Absolutely. I really agree. And I would say, the other thing is, this student from Florida did have some extracurriculars, but he didn't have any extracurriculars related to
Related, yeah, yep.
this very competitive college major that he was applying to. And that was really the key. So and I know it's so hard, right? If you're a ninth or 10th or 11th grader, you may not know what you're going
Sure.
to want to major in. And if that's the case, that's okay. But do a bunch of different activities that you might be interested in. So at least you'll have one thing to write about, right?
Yeah, yep.
You get closer to that when you're a senior.
Yeah, and for parents of the younger students, if you kind of think of a funnel approach where ninth grade, do everything that you can, and you do lots of different things so that the student can start to narrow down. 10th grade, we're going to cut out maybe half those things and focus on the ones we really liked. 11th grade, we're going to just focus on 1, 2, 3 activities that really the student enjoys and hopefully does align with their future college major and career. I will just say that if especially for, I don't know, 10th or 11th grade student that may be struggling with figuring out college major, I do have a resource for that. Feel free to drop me an email. This is all this person does. She's fantastic at it. So would love to, share that info. Dr. P, this has been awesome. Is there anything else you'd want the viewers to know before we wrap things up?
No, just I know that the process of essay writing and writing in general, I actually do some memoir writing myself, and I always like to share the quote from Nathaniel Hawthorne, the famous 19th century American author who wrote, "Easy reading is damn hard writing." So this is supposed to be hard. If your kid is finding it difficult, it actually means that they're on the right track.
They're trying.
Yeah, because it's the kid who says, "Oh, this is easy." They're probably really not getting an essay that will be very meaningful.
Yeah. Yep. Great. Well, the recording will go out tomorrow, and we'll put links to your website and for people to get in touch with you. Dr. P, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom.
Thanks, Dave, and thanks everybody else for coming. Bye.
Bye bye.